My friends, let us come together in a spirit of deep stillness and receptivity, for the truth we are about to consider cannot be grasped through the intellect, nor can it be approached as one more idea added to our storehouse of beliefs. It must be felt within, recognized in the quietness of our own being. There comes a moment in the life of every seeker when the question of life and death, of the appearing and disappearing of form, stands before us not as theology, not as philosophy, but as direct experience. It is in this moment that the truth of our identity is revealed most clearly if we are willing to see it. We have, for centuries, regarded death as an enemy, as a dark and terrible event that closes the door upon all that we have known. Yet this fear has been born only of one mistake: the belief that life is in the body, that the body is the self, and that the dissolution of the physical form is the dissolution of our being. This, my friends, is the great misunderstanding. The body is not the life. Consciousness is the life. The I that I am is the life eternal. And when we begin to perceive this, even faintly, the fear of death begins to lose its power over us. In the final months of my earthly life, there was no battle with death, no desperate attempt to hold the body together, no appeal to an external God to preserve a form that was never the seat of identity. Instead, there was only the quiet recognition that the life which animates, sustains, and maintains itself as this awareness has no beginning and no ending. What appears as birth, what appears as death, these are movements within consciousness, but they do not touch the one who witnesses them. And so, as we enter this subject today, let us not approach it as though we were studying the end of something. We are studying the revelation of something. We are studying the moment in which the personal sense of life falls away and the presence that has always been there, the I that is God, itself expressing as individual consciousness, shines forth in its purity. We are studying the truth that stands behind the veil of appearances. Let your heart be at ease. We are not here to contemplate loss, but to recognize gain. We are not here to mourn the frailty of the form, but to witness the eternality of the formless. And as we proceed, let us hold this one simple truth before us. No one has ever died. Forms have come and gone. Bodies have appeared and disappeared. But the invisible presence, the I that is God, remains untouched, unchanged, eternally expressing itself as the life you are. When we see this clearly, the great fear dissolves, and it is in this dissolving that true freedom begins. My friends, let us look gently and honestly at this matter of fear, for fear is not conquered by force, nor is it dissolved by effort. Fear is dispelled only by light, by the recognition of what is eternally true. And nowhere is fear more deeply rooted in human consciousness than in the belief that life can be taken from us, that existence can be threatened, and that identity can come to an end. It is very important that we do not condemn ourselves for this fear. Even the most sincere spiritual seeker may find that when the sense world presses upon him with its testimony of pain, decline, or danger, an instinctive tightening arises. This is not a moral failing, nor is it proof that we have been unfaithful to truth. It is simply the residue of centuries of conditioning human belief accepted as reality long before we had awakened to the nature of our true being. The universal fear of death is not personal. It is not your fear or my fear. It is the collective fear of a world that has identified itself with the body, this temporary form, this garment of flesh, and has forgotten the invisible life that animates it. When we speak of death, we are really speaking of the belief that life is in matter, dependent upon matter, and vulnerable because matter is subject to change. Let us understand this clearly. Fear persists only where we still believe we are separate from the source of life. Fear lives only in the conviction that we are self-contained, isolated beings struggling to preserve our existence. But the very moment we glimpse even faintly that the life we are living is not personal life but God life, not human existence but divine expression, that fear begins to lose its footing. Many spiritual seekers wonder, why, after all my study, all my meditation, all my spiritual practice, does fear still arise when the body is threatened? The answer is simple. The surface mind has accepted the truth, but it has not yet permeated the deeper levels of conditioning. We may intellectually declare, I am eternal, yet still reflexively behave as though the body were our life. These two layers must become one. And so I say to you with tenderness, do not be discouraged when fear appears. Fear appearing is not a sign of spiritual failure, it is an invitation to deeper recognition. It is the opportunity to turn once again to the truth that the life you are is not in the body, nor is it subject to the changes that touch the body. Fear arises only because we have momentarily forgotten who we are. And the moment we remember, truly remember, not as a belief but as a simple recognition, fear dissolves, not because we have pushed it away, but because there is nothing left in us for it to cling to. Every fear is a shadow of forgotten truth, and death is the greatest shadow of all. But when the light of I Am dawns in consciousness, even this shadow cannot remain. Now, let us turn gently to that period in which the physical form known as Joel Goldsmith moved toward its conclusion. I speak of these things not to stir emotion, nor to create a story about a person, but to show you how the principles we study become living demonstration when appearances grow most intense. The outer scene of those final months was simple: a body in decline, symptoms increasing, strength diminishing, and the natural processes that accompany the closing of physical life making themselves known. To the human eye, this is the point at which fear rises most sharply. The world believes that when the body weakens, life weakens. When the body deteriorates, identity deteriorates. When the body comes to its end, the person comes to an end. But this is precisely the moment when the one who has lived in truth knows that none of this touches the reality of being. During those days, there was pain, there was limitation, there was what the world calls terminal illness. But listen carefully. There was no personal sense of suffering, because the one who had spent a lifetime practicing the presence did not identify himself with the sensations of the body. He acknowledged them, yes, of course. Denial never plays a part in spiritual realization, but he did not take ownership of them. He allowed the body to be the body, the appearance to be the appearance, while resting in that quiet inner knowing, I am the life which is God. I am the presence that neither waxes nor wanes. I am the awareness in which this body appears, moves, and eventually dissolves. There was no attempt to force healing, no attempt to cling to physical continuity. Why? Because he understood the body to be an instrument useful for a time, then released when its function is complete. There is no tragedy in this, any more than there is tragedy in setting aside a garment that has become worn. The garment serves its purpose and is laid aside, but the one who wore it continues unchanged. And so the atmosphere around him in those days was one of quietness, not darkness, not fear, not dread quietness, a deep stillness that arises when the battle with appearances has ended, when consciousness no longer tries to control, improve, or preserve form, but simply beholds. Those who were near him reported no sense of struggle, no frantic searching for remedies, no pleading for intervention. There was only a soft resting in the presence that had guided his entire journey. That resting was not resignation, let us be clear. Resignation is a gesture of defeat. This was recognition. Recognition that the life which lived as Joel Goldsmith was never born into a body and could not be removed by the departure of a body. Recognition that the I which spoke through him from the beginning was the same I that existed before Abraham was, the same I that is the life of every individual who hears these words now. It is important to see the outer scene only as context, not as truth. The truth was in the stillness, in the non-reaction, in the peaceful abiding. The truth was in the refusal to accept the body's condition as a statement about identity. And in this way, even the final days of the physical form became a teaching not in words, but in demonstration. This is the opportunity every one of us has, not merely at the end of life, but every time the body or circumstances bear witness to change. The appearance is never the truth. The truth stands behind it as the silent, eternal presence that is our very being. Now, my friends, let us look more deeply at what was taking place during those final months, for this is where the real teaching lies. The outer appearance of a declining body is of no great significance. Bodies come and go, and they have done so since time began. What matters is the state of consciousness from which we meet these appearances. This is the entire secret of spiritual life, the recognition of the I that is eternal, even as the forms through which it expresses rise and fall in their appointed season. The inner practice in those days was the same practice that had been lived for decades. No new technique was introduced, no special meditation for the dying, no urgent prayer for deliverance. For truth does not change with circumstances. Truth is the same whether we are walking through a garden or lying upon a sick bed. And so the practice was simply this: resting in the awareness of I am. I am the presence that has no beginning and no ending. I am the life that is self-sustained and self-complete. I am the light that cannot be dimmed by shadows of material belief. I am the only identity anyone has ever had. In that recognition, there is no need to resist sensations, no need to argue with the body's condition, no need to attempt to shape appearances by thought. The mind grows very quiet, for it is no longer trying to control life. It is simply resting in life itself. This resting is not passivity. It is the highest form of activity, though it appears outwardly as stillness. It is the activity of divine awareness flowing without obstruction. It is the activity of truth dissolving the belief in a personal self. It is the activity of light, revealing that there is no darkness except the shadow cast by ignorance. During those days, there would be times when the body expressed discomfort, yet there was no inward tightening, no sense of this is happening to me. There was only the recognition. This, too, is an appearance in consciousness. It is not the truth of my being. And in that non-identification, suffering could not take root. Sensation may arise in the body, but suffering requires a me to suffer, and that me had long since been seen as an illusion. This is the heart of the inner practice, allowing everything to be as it is on the plane of appearance, while resting firmly in the knowing of what is true on the plane of reality. The spiritual student does not attempt to heal appearances. The spiritual student awakens to the truth behind appearances, and the truth is always this: the I that you are does not enter the body at birth, nor does it leave the body at death. The I that you are is the witnessing presence, not the form, witnessed. The I that you are is the life that lives itself, untouched by decay, untouched by endings, untouched by change. To rest in this recognition is to walk in the freedom of the sons of God. And it is this recognition, this silent, effortless recognition that carried the transition peacefully, naturally, and without fear. For when one abides in I am, there is no death to face, only a gentle releasing of the temporary form through which this infinite presence once expressed. This is not something reserved for a few. It is the natural heritage of every individual who turns within and acknowledges, I live, yet not I, but the Christ. This I am is the life that lives me. Let us go deeper now into this word immortality, for it is a term so often misunderstood. The world hears the word and imagines a personal life extended indefinitely, a human identity preserved eternally, or a body made indestructible by spiritual power. But, my friends, none of this is what immortality means in the life of the spirit. What is immortal is not the personality. What is immortal is not the human sense of self. What is immortal is not the body or the circumstances of our earthly journey. Immortality belongs only to that which was never born and therefore can never die. And so the first great revelation we must come to is this: there is no such thing as personal immortality. The person, as the world knows it, the name, the form, the accumulated history, has no continuity in spirit. The person appears in time and is dissolved in time, but the life that animates that person, the consciousness that shines through it, the presence that says I, that is eternal, that is the only immortality there is. When I speak of immortality, I speak of that which is alive right now as the awareness hearing these words. I speak of the one who is conscious of existing, yet whose existence does not depend upon the body, nor upon the world, nor upon any external condition. This I, this pure, unconditioned awareness, is the Christ, the Self, the infinite way. It does not begin at conception, nor does it end at death. It stands ever present behind all appearances. The purpose of spiritual living is not to preserve the body forever, but to awaken to the truth that the body is not the seat of your identity. In this awakening, fear dissolves, not because we have conquered death, but because we have seen that nothing real can die. What dies is the picture, what dies is the form, what dies is the mask through which the infinite has temporarily expressed, but the infinite itself remains unchanged. If you examine the great statements of the Master, you will find that he never identified life with the body. He said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He said, before Abraham was, I am. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. These statements do not refer to a man. They refer to the eternal presence speaking through the man. The I am is the immortality of every individual. This is why, in those final days, there was no sense of loss, no anticipation of ending, no clinging to the form. There was only the recognition that the I which had lived the entire span of the human experience was the same I that lived before that experience began and would continue after that experience concluded. Immortality, then, is not something to be attained. It is not a reward. It is not a future state. Immortality is the present reality of your being. It is the truth that is already here, already complete, already expressing itself as the consciousness that is aware in this moment. You do not become immortal. You awaken to the immortality that has always been yours. The more clearly this truth is realized, the more gently we move through life, for all fear of loss is rooted in the belief that what we are can be diminished. And once that belief dissolves, a great peace arises, an unshakable peace, a peace not dependent upon circumstance. This is the immortality Joel Goldsmith revealed, not in theory, but in living demonstration. And it is this immortality that you, too, will feel. the moment you turn within and recognize, I am the life eternal, appearing now as this individual expression, yet untouched by all the changes on the surface of experience. As we move further into this sacred subject, let us turn our attention away from the outer picture of declining physical form and consider the inner experience, for the outer appearance of a dissolving body tells us nothing about the life that is living itself. Truth reveals itself not in what the senses behold, but in the awareness with which we meet the senses' report. And so, in those final months, the essential activity was not of the body, nor of the mind, but of consciousness resting in its own eternal nature. There were moments when the body spoke loudly, moments of discomfort, moments of fatigue, moments in which the natural processes of physical dissolution made themselves known. Yet even in these moments, there was no inner disturbance, for the one beholding these sensations was not identified with them. That is the great key. Sensations arose in the body, but there was no me in them. They appeared, they passed, and they had no power to create suffering because there was no personal self claiming them. This inner state was not produced through effort. It was not a discipline imposed upon the mind. It was the natural fruit of decades spent in the quiet recognition that I can of mine own self do nothing, and that the life which animates us is God, appearing as individual being. When one has lived from this recognition long enough, identity shifts. The personal sense of self dissolves little by little, and in its place arises the awareness of I am, the universal identity expressing as the individual. It is this shift that made possible the profound peace present in those final days. There was no internal conversation of why is this happening or how can I change this, for those questions belong only to the mind that believes itself separate. Instead, there was a simple and natural abiding. The body is doing what bodies do, but I am not the body. I am the life that witnesses the body. Some have imagined that spiritual mastery means the body should always respond instantly to truth, or that the physical form should be immune to decline. But this is a misunderstanding rooted in the belief that spirit exists to preserve matter. Spirit does not preserve matter. Spirit reveals itself through matter for a season in its own perfect way. And when that season is complete, spirit continues without interruption, without loss, without change. This is what was unfolding within. The inner experience was quiet, not dramatic, not filled with visions or heavenly signs. There were no triumphal declarations, no ecstatic revelations, just a deep, unbroken awareness of presence. A simple knowing, I am, I always have been, I always will be. The form may fade, but I do not. This simplicity is what many seekers overlook. They expect the spiritual path to culminate in great supernatural display, but true realization is not supernatural. It is utterly natural, so natural, in fact, that the world often misses it. It comes with no fireworks, only the gentle disappearance of fear, the quiet dissolution of resistance, the soft abiding in what has always been present. And so, as the body declined, the consciousness behind the form grew clearer, more transparent, more free. There was no clinging, because there was nothing to cling to. There was no fear, because there was no belief in separation from life. There was no sorrow, because what could be lost? The form? Yes. But the self? Never. This is what Goldsmith experienced internally, a deep continuity of being, unbroken by the appearance of bodily change. And you, too, may taste the same continuity, not by imitating an attitude, but by recognizing the truth that the I which lives you now is the same I that lived him, the same I that lives all. The body passes, but I am remains. Now, my friends, let us gently turn from the appearance of one man's transition and consider what this demonstration reveals about your own life, your own consciousness, your own journey on this path. For the significance of those final days lies not in the story of Joel Goldsmith, but in the light they shed upon the truth of your being. Every event in the life of a spiritual teacher holds meaning only to the degree that it awakens recognition within you. And so we ask, what does this reveal about the life you are living now? First, it reveals that the fear of death, the deepest fear known to humanity, is not dissolved by changing circumstances, but by changing identity. You do not overcome fear by adjusting the conditions of your human experience. You overcome fear only by recognizing that the one who seems to fear is not the one you truly are. When identity shifts from the personal self to the I am, fear naturally dissolves, because the I am cannot be threatened. Second, his passing shows us that your security has never depended on the body. Your safety, your continuity, your very existence do not rest upon the strength of your physical form. The body may be healthy or ill, young or old, vigorous or frail, but the life that animates it remains untouched. When you recognize this, truly recognize it, you begin to meet life's challenges with a calmness the world cannot understand. You begin to live from a place of stability that is not conditioned by the senses. Third, you discover that nothing in your experience is as serious as you once believed. When you look at your life from the perspective of eternal being, the troubles that once seemed overwhelming lose their weight. Financial pressures, relationship tensions, bodily discomforts. These remain the appearances they always were, but the sense of me that struggles with them begins to fade. You learn to let things arise and pass without being shaken, because you are centered in the awareness that beholds them. Fourth, you are shown that spiritual realization is practical. It is not something reserved for moments of meditation or spiritual ecstasy. It is not something to be attained in the final days of life. It is to be lived now in the midst of your daily responsibilities, your everyday interactions, your ordinary challenges. Every moment is an opportunity to rest in the truth that the life you are is not the life of the body, not the life of the personality, but the life of God expressing as individual being. Fifth, you learn that the transition called death is not a dramatic event. It is not a rupture in consciousness. It is not a moment of terror or sudden awakening. It is simply the continuation of the same life that is present right now. The consciousness you bring to this moment is the consciousness you bring to that moment. If you live now with fear, you carry fear into that transition. If you live now in recognition, you carry recognition. And so the true work is always here, always now. Finally, his passing teaches you that you are not walking toward a final moment of loss. You are walking toward the deeper unveiling of what you already are. Every day, every challenge, every joy, every sorrow, every appearance of change is part of the slow, gentle dissolving of the belief that you are separate from the source of your being. And as this belief fades, you begin to live differently. You become less reactive, more spacious, more compassionate, not because you try to be, but because the false sense of self is losing its hold. You see, the truth is very simple. The life that lived as Joel Goldsmith is the same life that lives as you. The same I that expressed through his form is expressing through your form. There are not many lives. There is only one life, one presence, one consciousness, appearing as many forms. His passing merely revealed in a clear and quiet way, the truth that has always been true for all. And when you recognize this, your own life begins to change, not because you adopt new beliefs, but because you awaken to the reality that has been present from the beginning. My friends, having contemplated the nature of immortality and the quiet clarity that accompanied those final days, let us now turn to the practical dimension of this teaching. For truth, to be truth, must be lived. It must permeate our daily experience. It must become the atmosphere through which we meet every appearance, whether joyful or challenging. And so the question arises, how do we approach our own mortality in the same spirit of peace and recognition? How do we prepare not for death, but for the continual unveiling of life? The first and most essential practice is the practice of silence without agenda. Sit quietly each day, even for only a few minutes, without asking, without desiring, without seeking to change any condition. Simply rest in the awareness that I am here. This silence allows the mind to sink beneath the turbulence of thought and touch the deep stillness in which the presence reveals itself, not because we call it forth, but because it is already here. This simple resting begins to loosen the belief that life is something we must manage or protect. Second, begin to see the body with new eyes. The body is not to be despised, nor feared, nor clung to. It is the instrument through which life expresses in this dimension for a season. You care for it naturally, the way one tends to a garden or maintains a home, but you do so without identifying with it. The body may change, but the eye that witnesses the change is unchanging. As you gently, repeatedly see the body as an appearance in consciousness rather than the container of consciousness, you begin to feel an inner freedom that no condition can shake. Third, allow fear thoughts to arise without resisting them. Do not make a battle of the mind. When fear appears, simply acknowledge, this too is a universal belief appearing in my awareness. Do not claim it as yours. Do not struggle with it. Let it pass as clouds pass through the sky. The sky is not disturbed by the clouds, and consciousness is not disturbed by thoughts unless we identify with them. In this way, fear loses its foothold. Fourth, develop the habit of returning again and again to the simple recognition of I am, not as a phrase, not as an affirmation, but as a lived awareness. In moments of stillness, feel into this presence. In moments of difficulty, remember it. In moments of joy, acknowledge it. The more often you return to this recognition, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, it becomes spontaneous, effortless, automatic. And this is the beginning of living from the Christ within. Fifth, release the notion that you must purify the mind, perfect the personality, or perform great spiritual feats. The spiritual life is not a project. It is not a path of self-improvement. It is simply the steady relaxing of the false sense of self until the true emerges in clarity. You do not build the Christ identity. You uncover it, and you uncover it by doing less, not more. Sixth, contemplate often the truth that whatever can die was never you. This contemplation need not be morbid or heavy. It is liberating. Let the thought arise in simplicity. If this body were to fall away this very moment, would the witnessing presence disappear with it? And immediately you will feel the answer, no, I remain. You experience this every night when the body sleeps. You experience it in deep silence when the sense of me disappears. You experience it in moments of awareness when there is no thinker, only presence. Finally, recognize that the preparation for death is simply the preparation for life. There is no special practice for the final day. There is only the daily recognition of truth until the fear-based identity dissolves. Whether you are young or old, healthy or facing illness, the work is always the same. Return to the I am. Rest in the presence. Let the personal sense diminish. Let the eternal self reveal itself. In this way, you approach mortality not as a fearful event, but as a gentle transition, no more significant than the passing of one season into another. When that moment comes, it will be met with the same peace, the same unbroken awareness, the same recognition that guided every step of your life. For the one who knows the I am does not prepare for death. He abides in life, and life continues. My friends, let us come now to a gentle close, and as we do, I would invite you to rest not in thought, not in theory, but in the quiet awareness that is present even now, even here. For everything that has been shared, every truth that has unfolded, every glimpse into the eternal nature of your being has had but one purpose: to lead you home to the awareness of the presence that lives you. There is no journey to complete. There is no finish line to reach. There is no distant spiritual attainment awaiting you in some far-off future. What you seek, you already are. The life you have feared losing has never been yours to lose, for it is not personal life. It is the infinite expressing itself as individual consciousness, one life, one being, one I. When we look upon the transition called death, we do not look upon an ending. We look upon a passing of form, a shedding of the temporary garment. But you, the witnessing presence, are not touched by it. You are the same before, during, and after. The form may fall away, yes, but the life that animates the form does not fall away. It simply withdraws from one appearance and continues, unbroken, as it always has. And so the truth is this: you are not moving toward death. You are moving moment by moment into deeper recognition of life. You are not approaching a point of darkness. You are moving toward the dawning of your own eternal nature. Every fear, every challenge, every moment of stillness, every step on the path, these are not random events. They are invitations, each one calling you to rest more deeply in the I that is God. Let your heart be at peace. You are not fragile. You are not temporary. You are not a creature struggling to survive in a dangerous world. You are the very presence of God, made visible as individual being. You are the light of the Christ, the awareness of I am, appearing here, appearing now, expressing itself in the unique form that the world calls you. The body is a beautiful instrument. Use it, care for it, cherish it while it serves its purpose, but do not mistake it for your life. Let it come, let it go, let it change, let it rest. Through all of this, you remain the silent, watching, eternal self. If you do nothing else as a result of these words, let it be this: turn within each day, even for a moment, and recognize the presence that lives you. Let that recognition become your refuge, your strength, your peace. For in that recognition lies the end of fear, the end of struggle, the end of the belief in separation. In that recognition lies your freedom. And when the time comes for this form to be released, it will not be a moment of terror. It will be a moment of surrender into the very life that has carried you from the beginning. You will recognize it not as the end, but as the continuation of what has always been. The presence that lives you now will live you then. The I that is aware now will be aware then. The life that you are will simply flow into a new expression. Rest, then, in the assurance that nothing real can be lost, nothing eternal can be threatened, and you are eternal. I am is your name. I am is your identity. I am is your immortality. And in that I am, we are one.
Tonight, we're going to explore something that will fundamentally transform not just how you pray, but how you experience your entire relationship with the divine. And it all hinges on understanding 3 words that Jesus used with intentional precision. The Father knows. Have you ever wondered why your prayers sometimes feel like shouting into an empty void? Why, despite years of faithful petition, that desperate plea for help seems to bounce off the ceiling and fall flat at your feet? What if I told you that the very way you've been taught to pray might be keeping you from experiencing the fullness of divine connection that Jesus himself demonstrated? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, let me ask you something deeply personal. When you pray, do you find yourself begging, pleading, trying to convince God of your worthiness or the urgency of your need? Has this ever happened to you? You pour your heart out in desperate prayer, listing all the reasons why God should help you, why he should intervene, why he should notice your struggle. If so, you're not alone. In fact, this is how the vast majority of humanity approaches prayer. But here's the revolutionary truth that changes everything. Jesus never prayed this way, not once. Think about that for a moment. In all the accounts we have of Jesus' prayer life, you never find him begging. You never see him pleading with God like a stranger at the door, hoping for a handout. Instead, what you witness is something entirely different. A confidence, a certainty, an unshakable knowing that arose from his understanding of one single word: Father. But this wasn't Father as a religious title, a theological concept, or even a poetic metaphor. This was Father as source, as origin, as the very substance of his being. You see, when Jesus called God Father, he was revealing the most revolutionary spiritual truth ever articulated. He wasn't describing a distant deity somewhere beyond the clouds who might or might not respond to your requests if you phrase them correctly or prove yourself worthy enough. He was identifying the very nature of divine reality itself, that God is not separate from you, waiting for your prayers to reach him. God is the source from which you are currently, actively, continuously emerging. Just as a wave cannot be separated from the ocean, just as a ray cannot exist apart from the sun, you cannot be disconnected from the source that is giving you existence in this very moment. Stay with me here, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. The implications of understanding the Father knows go far deeper than you might imagine, and they have the power to completely revolutionize not just your prayer life, but your entire experience of reality itself. Most people completely misunderstand what Jesus meant when he declared, "I and my Father are one." For centuries, religious institutions have taught that this was Jesus claiming a unique, exclusive, divine status that separated him from the rest of humanity. But what if that interpretation has kept you from accessing the very truth Jesus was trying to reveal? What if he wasn't establishing his superiority, but rather illuminating a hidden reality about your own nature? Here's the transformation that happens when you truly grasp this. Jesus wasn't speaking about himself alone. He was unveiling the fundamental structure of existence itself, the relationship between the source and its expression. When he said those words, he was essentially pulling back the curtain on a truth that applies to every single person, including you. This oneness he spoke of isn't some spiritual achievement you earn after Decades of meditation, fasting, or religious practice, it's not a badge you collect at the end of a long spiritual journey. It's the foundation of your existence right now, in this very moment, whether you recognize it or not. Think about it this way, and this analogy will shift your entire mindset. Consider a wave rising from the ocean. Does that wave need to struggle, strive, or somehow prove itself worthy to become oceanic? Does it need to practice being ocean until it finally achieves oceanness? Of course not. The wave already is ocean, just temporarily expressing in wave form. It's not separate from the ocean trying desperately to reach it. It's not disconnected, hoping one day to merge with its source. It is, in every molecule, in every drop, pure ocean manifesting as wave. Now apply that same understanding to yourself and watch how the entire landscape of your spiritual life transforms. You are not a human being standing at a distance from God, reaching upward with desperate prayers, hoping to somehow bridge the gap between you and the divine. That entire framework is built on an illusion, a fundamental misunderstanding of what Father actually means. You are God's own life temporarily expressing in human form. You are the breath of the divine taking shape in time and space. This is the revolutionary impact of understanding the father-child relationship that Jesus lived from, and it changes absolutely everything about how you approach prayer, how you face challenges, and how you understand your very existence. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. I'm here to bring you content that goes deep into truths that actually transform lives, not just surface-level spirituality. The Father knows because the Father is not external to you, observing from a distance. The Father is the very source from which your consciousness is arising in this moment. Now I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because when you truly internalize what this means for your daily life, the practical implications become staggering. Write in the comments, I am beginning to understand, if this is starting to make sense to you. Let me reveal something that might shake the foundation of everything you've been taught about spirituality. There's a singular belief that sits at the root of virtually all human suffering, all anxiety, all that persistent sense that something is fundamentally wrong with your life. It's not sin, it's not unworthiness, it's not even your past mistakes or current circumstances. It's the belief in separation itself. This is the hidden truth that most spiritual teachings dance around but never quite articulate clearly. The moment you believe you are separate from your source, you enter into a state of existential fear that colors every decision, every prayer, every hope you carry. Think about the impact this has on your daily life. When you operate from separation consciousness, you approach everything as an orphan in the universe. You beg, you plead. You try to convince God that you deserve help, that your situation is urgent enough to warrant divine attention. But here's the transformation that happens when you shift from separation to recognition. You stop begging and start receiving. You stop exhausting yourself with effort and start allowing. The divine nature that was always there begins to flow through you naturally, not because you finally got the formula right, but because you removed the mental block that was damming up the flow. Now watch how this changes the actual mechanics of prayer, the behind-the-scenes reality of how communication with the divine actually works. Someone trapped in separation consciousness approaches prayer like this. Please, God, help me with this problem. I'm struggling here. I need you to intervene. Please notice me. Please care about my situation. Do you hear the mindset embedded in those words? It's the mindset of distance, of disconnection, of trying to get the attention of someone who might not be paying attention. But someone who understands the father relationship prays from an entirely different foundation. They don't beg for wisdom to arrive from somewhere external. They recognize that divine intelligence is already present within them as their true nature, as their inheritance, as the very substance of their consciousness right now. This isn't positive thinking. where you pretend something is true until you convince yourself. This is recognition of what is actually real. When you recognize that the Father knows your needs before you ask, you're not engaging in wishful thinking or spiritual fantasy. You're acknowledging the structure of reality itself. A father doesn't wait for his child to perfectly articulate their needs before caring. A father anticipates, provides, nurtures by the very nature of the relationship. And when that Father is the infinite source of all existence, and you are the direct expression of that source, then the meeting of your needs isn't something that might happen if you pray correctly enough. It's built into the fabric of the relationship itself. What happens next in this journey of understanding will show you exactly how this plays out in practical, tangible ways that you can apply immediately. Drop a comment saying, "I'm ready for this shift," if you're feeling the weight of this revelation. Here's where we can pull back the curtain on something absolutely fascinating about how Jesus operated. When you study the accounts of his healings, there's a pattern that emerges once you know what to look for. He never begged God to intervene from some distant heaven, not once. He didn't engage in lengthy petitions, trying to convince the Father to reach down and fix the situation. Instead, what you see is something far more powerful. He simply acknowledged the Father's presence right there, in that very moment, in that specific situation. And that acknowledgement itself was the catalyst for transformation. Think about the mindset shift this requires. Jesus understood something that most people miss entirely. Where God is, wholeness must be. Not wholeness might arrive if we pray hard enough. Not wholeness could happen if we're worthy. But wholeness must be by the very nature of divine presence. It's not optional. It's not conditional. Where the Father is, the child's needs are already met through the structure of the relationship itself. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual bypassing of real problems. This is understanding the mechanics of how reality actually operates at its deepest level. Now, I want you to feel the contrast between these two approaches, because the impact on your inner state is dramatic. You've been conditioned through years of religious teaching and cultural programming to seek God's help as if you were fundamentally separated from divine supply. You approach prayer like someone standing outside a locked door, knocking desperately, hoping someone inside will hear you and decide you're worthy of assistance. Every prayer becomes anxious effort. Every petition carries the underlying fear that maybe this time your need won't be met. Maybe this problem is too big. Maybe you've used up your quota of answered prayers. But watch what happens when you grasp the Father relationship the way Jesus understood it. A father's resources aren't distributed to his children based on their performance or their ability to articulate needs correctly. The inheritance isn't earned through worthiness or granted as a reward for good behavior. It flows naturally through the simple fact of relationship. You are the child. The Father's resources are already yours by the nature of that connection. When this truth penetrates your consciousness at a deep level, your entire prayer life undergoes a profound transformation. You shift from begging to recognition. You move from anxious effort into restful knowing. You stop trying to get God to notice you and start acknowledging what is already present and active in your life right now. This restful knowing isn't passivity or resignation. It's the most powerful stance you can take because it aligns you with how divine supply actually operates. When you rest in the knowing that the Father already knows, already provides, already moves on your behalf by the nature of your relationship, you create the inner space for that supply to manifest in tangible ways. The practical applications of this understanding go deeper than you might imagine, and they touch every area of your life where you've been struggling. Leave a comment with "The Father knows" if this is beginning to resonate with you on a deeper level. Let me share with you the secret that has the power to completely revolutionize not just your prayer life, but your entire approach to spiritual growth. When you pray acknowledging God as Father in the way Jesus actually meant it, something radical happens in your consciousness. You're no longer trying to get God to do something for you. You're not attempting to manipulate divine will or convince a reluctant deity to intervene. Instead, you're engaged in something far more profound. You're remembering what is already true. You're recalling a reality that exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Divine life is already flowing through you with every breath. Divine wisdom is already present as the intelligence operating your body, beating your heart, growing your cells. Divine substance is already expressing as your being right here, right now, in this very moment. Do you see the transformation in mindset this creates? Most people exhaust themselves with spiritual striving, climbing what they imagine is a ladder reaching up to God in some distant heaven. They read another book, attend another seminar, master another meditation technique, all in hopes of finally bridging the gap, finally achieving the connection they desperately seek. But here's the revelation that changes the entire journey. You are not climbing toward anything. You are awakening to something that has always been true. You have never been separate from your source, not for one single moment of your existence. Think about how a child comes into being. Does an infant need to strive, struggle, or prove themselves worthy to become their father's offspring? Do they need to achieve some level of spiritual maturity before the relationship becomes real? Of course not. They simply are the Father's child by the very nature of birth. The relationship isn't earned, it's inherent. It's built into the structure of their existence from the first moment of conception. Now apply that same understanding to your relationship with the divine, and watch how the burden of spiritual effort begins to lift from your shoulders. You are God's expression by the very nature of existence itself. This isn't something you achieve tomorrow or next year after you've meditated enough, prayed enough, or purified yourself enough. This is the foundation of your being right now. The Father knows because you are not separate from the Father, trying to get his attention. You are the Father's life, taking temporary form in time and space. Every quality you've been seeking externally, every divine attribute you've been trying to acquire through spiritual practice is already present as your true nature. The impact of truly grasping this goes beyond what most spiritual teachings even touch on, because it dissolves the very premise that keeps people trapped in cycles of seeking without finding. What this means for your daily decisions, your responses to challenges, and your entire experience of being alive becomes clearer when you see how this understanding operates in real situations. Comment, "I remember now," if this truth is stirring something deep within you. If this resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who've been searching for this deeper understanding of prayer. Let me tell you about a woman named Margaret, whose story perfectly illustrates the dramatic shift we're talking about. For 30 years, Margaret prayed every single day, begging God to heal her chronic pain. 30 years. Think about that level of persistence, that depth of desperation. She attended healing services, consulted with spiritual practitioners, read every book she could find on prayer and healing. Yet nothing changed. The pain remained constant, grinding, relentless. She felt abandoned by God, as if her prayers were hitting some invisible ceiling and falling back down unanswered. Then something happened that transformed her entire journey. She encountered this teaching about the Father relationship, and at first she resisted it strongly. How could she not be separate from God when her body screamed with pain every moment? But she decided to try a different approach, not because she had faith it would work, but because she had exhausted every other option. Each morning, she sat quietly, and here's the crucial shift in her mindset. She stopped asking for healing. Instead, she simply acknowledged God as her actual source, as the life flowing through her right now. She wasn't trying to get anything. She was recognizing what was already true. For 3 weeks, nothing seemed to change in her physical condition. But then something shifted in her consciousness, something she couldn't quite articulate but could definitely feel. Within 2 months, her pain began diminishing. Within 6 months, it was completely gone. Not through begging, not through convincing God she was worthy, through recognition, through the simple act of remembering her true relationship with the Source. Now consider Thomas, whose story reveals how this principle operates in the realm of practical affairs and business decisions. Thomas struggled with business failure for years, watching his company hemorrhage money while his family's security crumbled around him. He prayed constantly, desperately asking God to send customers, to improve sales, to solve his financial crisis. His prayers felt like shouting into an empty void, and the harder he tried, the worse things seemed to get. When he discovered this teaching about the Father principle, he made a radical decision to completely change his approach. He stopped begging for business success. Instead, he spent time each day recognizing that divine intelligence was his. True mind, that infinite supply was his actual substance. He wasn't pretending or using positive affirmations. He was acknowledging a reality that existed whether his bank account reflected it or not. Gradually, over 8 months, opportunities began appearing. Connections formed naturally. His business stabilized completely. The impact wasn't instantaneous magic, but it was real, tangible transformation rooted in a shift of consciousness. What both these stories reveal is something crucial about how this understanding operates in real life, behind the scenes of what we see with our physical eyes. The transformation is always consciousness first, then conditions second. When you stop approaching God as a separate entity, you need to convince and start recognizing the Father relationship as your actual reality. Something fundamental changes in how you move through the world. Type consciousness first in the comments if you're seeing how this pattern works. There's a statement Jesus made that most people read right past without grasping its revolutionary implications. He said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." Think about what that actually means for a moment. Before you formulate the words, before you identify the problem, before you even become consciously aware of the need, the Father already knows. Not because the Father is watching from a distance, monitoring your life like some cosmic surveillance system, but because the Father is the very source of your being, the intelligence that animates your existence. A good father anticipates the needs of his children without being told. He sees patterns, senses shifts, provides before the request even forms. Now amplify that understanding to the level of divine intelligence. The source that is giving you existence in this very moment, that is breathing your breath and thinking your thoughts through you, already knows every requirement of your being. It knows what you need tomorrow, next week, next year. Not as information gathered externally, but as intimate knowledge that comes from being the life itself that's living as you. This completely transforms the issue at hand. The issue is never getting God to help you. That's the wrong question entirely. The issue is recognizing the help that is already present, already active, already moving on your behalf through the Father relationship. Can you feel how this shifts your entire approach to challenges? When you understand that the Father knows before you ask, prayer stops being about information transfer. You're not updating God on your situation. You're not explaining why you need help. You're recognizing a reality that already exists. You're aligning your consciousness with what is already true behind the scenes of your visible circumstances. Now let me take you deeper into what this means for your actual nature. Consider how inheritance works in human families. A child inherits the qualities of their father naturally, automatically through the simple fact of biological connection. They don't have to earn those inherited traits. They don't have to prove themselves worthy of having their father's eyes or their father's abilities. The inheritance flows through the relationship itself. Now apply that same principle to your relationship with the divine and watch how it transforms your understanding of who you are. If God is your true father, and we've established that this isn't metaphor, but the actual structure of reality, then divine qualities are your nature, not your potential nature, not what you might become if you work hard enough, your actual nature right now. Peace is not something you must acquire through years of struggle and spiritual discipline. It's your inheritance. Wisdom is not something you lack and need to accumulate through study. It's your birthright as God's expression. Love, joy, abundance, creativity, all of these are not distant goals you're trying to reach. They're the qualities of your source, and therefore they're already present as your true being. The transformation happens when this stops being a nice idea and becomes your living consciousness. When you begin making decisions from the awareness that divine qualities are your inheritance, you stop living from fear and limitation. You stop approaching life as if you're fundamentally lacking and need to fight for every scrap of good. Instead, you move through life with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their true nature. The practical implications of living from this awareness reach into every decision you make, every relationship you navigate, every challenge you face. Write, "This is my inheritance," if you're beginning to own this truth. Now let me give you something practical, something you can implement immediately that will begin shifting your consciousness from separation to recognition. What I'm about to share isn't complicated, but don't let its simplicity fool you. The most profound transformations often come through the simplest practices, repeated consistently until they rewire your entire way of perceiving reality. Every morning before your day begins, before you check your phone, before you dive into the demands and decisions that await you, sit quietly for 10 to 15 minutes. And here's what makes this different from most meditation or prayer practices. You're not going to ask God for anything. You're not going to present your list of needs or concerns. Instead, you're simply going to acknowledge what is already true. Speak this truth silently to yourself. God is my life right now, my breath, my consciousness, my very being. Feel the weight of those words. You're not hoping this becomes true. You're recognizing what is true whether you acknowledge it or not. As you sit there, thoughts of problems will inevitably arise. Your mind will want to drift to that difficult situation at work, that relationship challenge, that financial concern. This is completely natural. Don't fight these thoughts or judge yourself for having them. Instead, gently return to recognition. Silently remind yourself, my Father is present here as my true nature. You're training your awareness to see beyond the appearance of problems to the reality of divine presence. This is the practice of the presence, and it's how you begin to live from a completely different foundation. Now, here's what's crucial about this practice. Commit to doing it daily for at least 30 days without judging whether it's working. Your rational mind will want to evaluate, to measure, to see if you're getting results. Resist that urge. You're not trying to make something happen. You're not performing a technique to manipulate reality. You're simply practicing recognition until it becomes your habitual consciousness. Until seeing the Father's presence becomes more natural than seeing only problems and limitations. The transformation that emerges from this consistent practice leads to something that most people spend their entire lives seeking: ultimate freedom. Not freedom from having challenges in your life, but freedom from the tyranny of circumstance. This is where the real shift in mindset occurs. When you truly grasp that the Father knows, that the Father provides, that the Father is your very being, external conditions no longer determine your inner state. Your peace stops being dependent on whether things are going well or falling apart. your joy stops. Fluctuating based on your bank balance or your health reports, you've discovered that your true life, your real source, your actual being exists in the dimension of divine consciousness, not in the changing world of form. The world of form will continue to shift, to fluctuate, to present challenges and opportunities. But beneath it all, there's an unchanging reality. You are the Father's expression, and the Father knows. This knowing isn't information. It's the very structure of your existence. When this becomes your lived experience rather than just an intellectual concept, you move through life with a quality of presence that impacts everyone around you. Comment, I am choosing this practice, if you're ready to commit to these 30 days of recognition. If you've made it this far with me, I want you to know that's not by accident. Something in this message resonated with you at a level deeper than casual interest. You're not just watching content. You're on a genuine journey of transformation, and that matters. This understanding of the Father knows isn't meant to stay as information in your mind. It's meant to become the foundation of how you live, how you pray, how you experience every moment of your existence. If this resonated with you, if you felt something shift as we went through this together, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it, people who've been exhausted by years of begging prayers and are ready for the freedom of recognition. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a great time. I'm committed to bringing you content that doesn't just scratch the surface of spirituality, but goes deep into the truths that actually transform lives. Every video on this channel is designed to give you practical wisdom you can apply immediately, revelations that shift your consciousness, not just theories to think about. Leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me," if you sense that divine timing brought you to this video right now. I read every single comment, and I love hearing how these teachings are landing in your life. There's another video right here that builds on what we've covered today, taking you even deeper into living from this consciousness of divine sonship. Click and continue with me over there. Let's keep this transformation moving forward together.
For 30 years, Joel Goldsmith searched every religion, every philosophy, every healing method known to humanity. What he discovered in a moment of desperate silence changed everything we thought we knew about God, healing, and the very nature of reality itself. This wasn't just another spiritual teaching. Most people pray to God, asking for things, begging for help, hoping for miracles from some distant divine power. Joel discovered we've been approaching this completely backward for centuries. The revolutionary truth he uncovered doesn't just heal bodies. It transforms entire lives in ways that seem impossible. The secret isn't about getting God's attention or becoming worthy of divine love. It's about realizing something so profound, so simple, that when you truly understand it, physical healing, emotional freedom, and material abundance become natural expressions of what you already are. This discovery shattered every religious assumption Joel had ever held. It challenged the very foundation of traditional Christianity and opened a doorway to what he called the mystical path, a way of living that makes miracles ordinary and transforms every moment into a sacred encounter. Here's what Joel realized that night in 1946 during his deepest spiritual crisis. God isn't separate from you, waiting somewhere in heaven to be contacted through prayer or worship. God is your very consciousness when it's free from the illusion of separation. This isn't philosophy. This is practical foundation for miracles. Think about it carefully. Every time you've experienced peace, love, or sudden knowing that transcended your circumstances, you weren't contacting something outside yourself. You were experiencing your true nature without the interference of fear-based thinking. Joel called this the Christ within, your divine identity. When you stop seeking God out there and recognize the divine presence as your own consciousness expressing itself as your life, something extraordinary happens. Problems don't get solved through effort. They dissolve because you're no longer creating them from a place of separation and lack. This recognition changes everything about how you approach challenges, relationships, health, and abundance. You're no longer a limited human being seeking help from God. You're divine consciousness itself, expressing as your individual human experience. Joel discovered what he called the practicing of the presence. But this isn't meditation as most people know it. This is a radical shift in how you perceive reality moment by moment. You stop seeing yourself as a human being having occasional spiritual experiences during prayer or meditation. Instead, you begin recognizing yourself as spiritual consciousness having a human experience. When this recognition becomes natural rather than something you have to remember to do, your entire relationship with challenges, health, relationships, and abundance transforms at the core level. The practicing isn't something you do for 20 minutes in the morning and evening. It becomes the foundation from which you live every moment of your day. You begin to see through the appearances of discord to the underlying harmony that's always been present. You start recognizing that what you call problems are actually invitations to go deeper into truth. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice seeing through appearances to spiritual reality until this seeing becomes more natural than breathing itself. This is where Joel's teaching becomes revolutionary and challenges everything traditional religion has taught about the relationship between humanity and divinity. He taught that the moment you realize I and the Father are one, you stop being a person who needs healing and become the very presence that does the healing. You're not trying to get something from God. You are the God presence expressing itself as your individual consciousness. But here's the part most teachers miss completely. This realization doesn't happen through effort, technique, or years of spiritual practice. It happens through what Joel called resting in the silence of being. When thoughts stop trying to fix, change, or improve anything. When the mind releases its grip on outcomes and solutions, truth reveals itself naturally. A woman came to Joel with terminal cancer that doctors said was incurable. Instead of treating her condition, he sat with her in this silence of being. Within weeks, every trace of cancer had disappeared from her body. The doctors called it medically impossible. Joel knew it was spiritually inevitable once the illusion of separation dissolved and her true spiritual identity was recognized and experienced. Margaret had struggled with chronic pain for 15 years that dominated every aspect of her daily life. Doctors, specialists, alternative healers, pain management clinics. Nothing provided lasting relief. She'd tried every spiritual method imaginable, from positive thinking to energy healing. But the pain persisted relentlessly. When she finally encountered Joel's teaching through a friend, she was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. The first breakthrough came not during formal meditation, but while washing dishes one ordinary Tuesday morning. She suddenly realized she'd been seeking healing as Margaret, the suffering person. In that moment of washing dishes, something extraordinary happened. Margaret, the person with chronic pain, disappeared from her awareness, and only pure awareness remained. Awareness without pain, without story, without the identity that had been suffering for 15 years. The pain was simply absent. Within 3 months, the chronic pain that had defined her life for 15 years was completely gone. But more than that, Margaret discovered she was living from a completely different foundation. Fear-based thinking had lost its grip on her consciousness entirely, and life became an adventure rather than an endurance test. Robert was facing complete financial ruin after 20 years of building his business. Bankruptcy papers were being prepared, creditors were calling daily, and his marriage was falling apart under the crushing weight of financial pressure. Traditional positive thinking and manifestation techniques had only made him feel more frustrated and hopeless. Joel taught him something radically different from anything he'd encountered in self-help or prosperity teachings. Instead of trying to demonstrate prosperity or attract abundance from outside himself, Robert learned to recognize the abundance that was already present in his consciousness as his spiritual birthright. He stopped seeing himself as lacking and needing to attract abundance from some external source. As Robert began living from this recognition of inherent wholeness rather than acquired prosperity, opportunities appeared naturally without force or struggle. His consciousness shifted from scarcity to abundance. Within 6 months, not only was his business thriving beyond his previous success, but his relationships had transformed because he was no longer operating from fear and desperation. He was expressing from fullness rather than grasping from emptiness, and life responded accordingly. Sarah had been battling severe depression for most of her adult life, spending years in therapy and trying various medications that provided some relief, but never addressed the underlying emptiness. She'd tried meditation, spiritual practices, self-help programs. Some provided temporary uplift, but nothing created lasting transformation. Through Joel's teaching, Sarah discovered that depression wasn't something wrong with her that needed to be fixed through treatment or positive thinking. It was the natural result of consciousness believing it was separate from its source, cut off from the love and wholeness that is its true nature. When this fundamental belief in separation dissolved through recognition of her true spiritual identity, depression couldn't maintain itself anymore. The shift happened gradually over several weeks as Sarah began experiencing moments of causeless joy and deep peace that had no external reason or trigger. These moments expanded and deepened until they became her natural state, rather than temporary experiences. The person who had been depressed for decades simply was no longer there. A new foundation for living had been established that was unshakable by external circumstances. James had been seeking spiritual truth for 20 years through various teachers, traditions, and practices. He'd had profound experiences, moments of awakening and deep peace, but somehow always seemed to fall back into old patterns of thinking and reacting to life's challenges with the same fears and frustrations. What Joel revealed changed everything about James's approach to spirituality. James realized he'd been treating spirituality as something he did rather than something he was. He'd been seeking enlightenment as a future attainment, rather than recognizing his true nature as already enlightened consciousness temporarily forgetting itself. The moment he stopped seeking enlightenment and recognized his true nature as already enlightened consciousness, simply having a temporary human experience, everything shifted permanently. The spiritual search ended not because he found what he was looking for, but because he realized he'd never actually lost it. James describes it as coming home to himself after 20 years of looking everywhere else for what had always been present. The seeking ended, but spiritual living began in a completely natural, effortless way that integrated seamlessly with daily human responsibilities and relationships. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the primary realization of oneness, Joel developed what he called spiritual treatment. But this isn't treatment as most people understand it. This isn't sending thoughts, energy, or prayers to fix problems. It's recognizing the spiritual truth that dissolves the illusion, creating the appearance of the problem in the first place. When someone calls asking for help with a health challenge, financial crisis, or relationship conflict, a Joel Goldsmith practitioner doesn't try to heal the condition or solve the problem. Instead, they rest in the recognition that in spiritual truth, there is no person with a condition. There is only perfect spiritual being expressing. This recognition and consciousness has immediate and tangible effects in what we call the physical world. Symptoms disappear, relationships heal, financial situations resolve, not because something was sent to fix them, but because the truth of being dissolved the illusion that created the appearance of discord. The practitioner becomes a transparency for truth rather than a person trying to help another person. This complete shift in identity from helper to transparency for divine consciousness is what makes Joel's approach to healing so remarkably effective and permanent. Joel taught what he called spiritual discernment, the developed ability to see beyond appearances to spiritual reality in every situation you encounter. When you look at a magnificent sunset, you're not simply seeing colored light hitting particles in the atmosphere. You're witnessing infinite beauty expressing itself in form. This same discernment applies to everything in your experience throughout the day. When you see lack, discord, disease, or limitation, you're looking at appearances that have no spiritual reality. Spiritual discernment reveals the underlying perfection that's always present, always available to be experienced by consciousness. The practice isn't about denying what appears to be happening or pretending problems don't exist. It's about recognizing what's really happening behind the appearances. Divine consciousness expressing itself perfectly, even when that perfection is temporarily obscured by limited perception. This recognition naturally transforms your experience without effort or struggle. You don't change the appearances, you see through them to reality, and the appearances naturally align with the truth you're recognizing rather than the illusion you were believing. One of Joel's most powerful and transformative techniques was what he called the art of dying daily. This isn't about physical death, it's about the daily dying of the personal sense of self that believes it's separate from God, from good, from the wholeness that is its true nature. Every time you catch yourself thinking as a person who lacks something, needs something, or fears something, you can let that personal sense die in that moment. In its place, you recognize yourself as the very presence of completeness, expressing itself as your individual experience of life. This dying to the personal sense becomes so natural and automatic that you begin living from spiritual identity rather than human identity, without effort or constant remembering. From this foundation, what humans call miracles become normal, natural expressions of what you actually are. The daily practice of dying to limitation and being reborn to truth creates a momentum of transformation that eventually becomes self-sustaining. You no longer have to work at being spiritual, you simply are spiritual consciousness expressing as human experience. Joel discovered that the key to permanent transformation lies in what he called the middle path, living fully human while knowing yourself as divine consciousness. You don't transcend the human experience or escape into some ethereal spiritual realm. You live human life from your true spiritual foundation. This means you pay your bills, maintain your relationships, care for your body, and fulfill your responsibilities. But you do all of this from the recognition of your true nature rather than from fear, lack, or the belief that you're separate from infinite good. The middle path dissolves the old spiritual misconception that you must choose between being spiritual and being practical. You become supremely practical because you're operating from truth rather than illusion, from abundance rather than limitation, from love rather than fear. Daily life becomes a continuous expression of spiritual principles rather than a distraction from them. Work becomes worship, relationships become holy encounters, and the most ordinary activities become opportunities to express divine creativity and love. But let's be completely honest about the challenges you'll face as you begin living these truths. The mind that's been conditioned for years or decades to think in terms of separation, lack, and limitation doesn't instantly embrace these revolutionary ideas. You might experience what Joel called periods of spiritual dryness. During these challenging times, the old thinking patterns seem to return with a vengeance. You might doubt everything you've learned, feel like you're back where you started, or wonder if any of this spiritual understanding is real or just wishful thinking and self-deception. Joel taught that these periods are actually signs of genuine progress, not failure or spiritual regression. They're the final attempts of conditioned thinking to maintain its grip on your consciousness. The key is not to fight these experiences, but to continue resting in truth even when you don't feel it. These dark nights of the soul, as mystics have called them, are temporary and necessary parts of the transformation process. They're opportunities to prove that your spiritual understanding doesn't depend on feeling good or having positive experiences. Another common challenge that can derail spiritual progress is what Joel called spiritual pride, the subtle tendency to believe you're more evolved, more enlightened, or spiritually superior to others who haven't discovered these truths. This form of separation can actually block your continued spiritual unfoldment. The antidote to spiritual pride is genuine humility, recognizing that spiritual understanding is a gift of grace, not a personal achievement or accomplishment. You didn't earn or deserve this awareness any more than you earned the ability to breathe or your heart's ability to beat automatically. When spiritual pride arises, and it will arise subtly even in sincere seekers, return immediately to the simplicity of gratitude. Be grateful that truth is revealing itself through your consciousness, and let that gratitude dissolve any sense of spiritual superiority or separation from others. Remember that everyone is the same divine consciousness expressing at different levels of recognition. Your role is to be transparent for truth, not to judge others' spiritual development or try to convince them of what you've discovered. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of Joel's teaching is learning to live without the mental habit of trying to use spiritual truth to get something. The conditioned mind wants to turn these principles into techniques for manifesting desires, solving problems, or achieving better life circumstances. But the moment you try to use truth to get something, you've stepped back into the consciousness of separation. You've become a person who lacks something and is trying to use spirituality to acquire it. True spiritual living means recognizing that you already are everything you could ever need or want. This doesn't mean desires disappear or that you become passive about improving your life circumstances. It means your desires arise from fullness rather than emptiness, and their fulfillment happens naturally as expressions of what you are, rather than acquisitions by who you think you are. The shift from using truth to being truth is subtle but crucial. When you are truth expressing, your life naturally reflects that truth without effort, manipulation, or trying to make things happen through spiritual techniques. The ultimate challenge in Joel's path is what he called the final sacrifice, giving up even the desire for spiritual experiences, spiritual progress, or advanced spiritual understanding. As long as you're seeking something spiritual, you're maintaining the illusion of separation from what you seek. The resolution comes through grace, spontaneous moments when seeking stops not because you found what you were looking for, but because you suddenly realize the seeker and the sought are one and have always been one. These moments of grace can't be produced through effort, but they can be welcomed. When you stop trying to become spiritual and simply rest in what you are right now, the spiritual nature of your being reveals itself naturally. This is the end of the spiritual path because you realize there was never anywhere to go or anything to attain. The final sacrifice leads to the ultimate freedom, living without spiritual seeking while being constantly aware of your spiritual nature. You become ordinary in the most extraordinary way, completely human while completely divine. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Living Joel's teaching in daily life means bringing this consciousness of oneness into every situation, relationship, and challenge you encounter. When your coworker irritates you with their behavior, instead of reacting from personality and old conditioning, you recognize the Christ in them, and the Christ as your own true identity. This isn't about being nice, tolerant, or spiritually correct. It's about seeing through the personal appearances to spiritual reality. When you consistently see from this perspective, relationships become harmonious not because people change their behavior to please you, but because you're seeing their true nature. At work, instead of competing, manipulating, or struggling for advancement, you express your spiritual qualities, creativity, wisdom, love, intelligence, naturally and authentically. Opportunities arise because you're being authentic spiritual expression rather than a personality trying to get something. Your presence at work becomes uplifting to others, not because you're preaching or teaching spirituality, but because you're living from a foundation of peace and wholeness that others unconsciously recognize and are drawn to. In parenting, Joel's principles create profound harmony and understanding between parents and children. Instead of seeing your children as people you need to control, guide, or fix, you recognize them as spiritual beings expressing their divine nature through the temporary experience of childhood. This recognition allows you to guide and discipline from love rather than fear, from wisdom rather than control. Children respond to this spiritual recognition with natural cooperation because they're being seen and treated as the divine beings they actually are, not just as small humans with problems. Family conflicts resolve more easily because you're not taking personal behavior personally. You see through temporary emotional expressions to the permanent spiritual identity of each family member. This doesn't mean you become permissive. It means you respond from wisdom rather than reaction. The home becomes a sanctuary where everyone feels safe to express their authentic nature because they're being seen and loved for what they are, rather than judged for what they do or don't do. Financial challenges become opportunities to prove spiritual principles in practical, tangible ways. Instead of seeing money as something external you need to attract, earn, or struggle for, you recognize abundance as the very nature of infinite consciousness, expressing itself as your experience. This doesn't mean becoming passive about money or ignoring practical responsibilities. It means approaching financial obligations and opportunities from spiritual abundance rather than material lack. You make wise decisions, work diligently, and manage resources responsibly from fullness rather than fear. Many practitioners find that as they live from this recognition of inherent abundance, their financial situations naturally improve not through struggle, manifestation techniques, or trying to attract money, but as natural expressions of the abundance they recognize themselves to be. Money becomes a tool for expressing love, rather than a source of security or identity. This shift in relationship to money often results in greater financial freedom because decisions are made from wisdom rather than fear or greed. Physical health becomes a natural expression of spiritual wholeness when you begin recognizing your body as the visible expression of perfect spiritual being, rather than a material thing that can get sick or break down. This recognition transforms your entire approach to health and healing. This understanding doesn't replace medical care when needed, but it provides the spiritual foundation that supports all healing, whether through medicine, natural methods, or spontaneous resolution. You work with healthcare providers from wisdom rather than fear, making decisions from wholeness rather than desperation. The body responds to being seen and treated as spiritual rather than merely material. Many practitioners report improved health, increased vitality, and faster healing as natural results of living from spiritual identity rather than material identification. You begin to understand that symptoms are often consciousness expressing imbalance, and as consciousness returns to its natural state of wholeness, the body naturally reflects that harmony. Health becomes normal rather than something you have to work to maintain. As Joel's teaching becomes your natural way of being rather than something you practice, you discover what he called the healing consciousness. You begin to have a positive, uplifting effect on everyone you encounter, often without saying anything specifically spiritual or trying to help anyone. People are naturally drawn to the peace they feel in your presence. They open up, share their challenges, and often find their own solutions simply through being around someone who is resting in spiritual truth, rather than reacting from personal conditioning and fear. This healing presence becomes so natural that you often don't realize you're having this effect on others. You're simply being yourself, your true spiritual self, and that authenticity creates space for others to connect with their own truth and find their own answers. You become a living demonstration of spiritual principles rather than someone who talks about them. This demonstration is far more powerful than any words because people can feel the reality of what you've discovered through your presence. Years of living these principles consistently create what Joel called spiritual stability, the developed ability to remain centered in truth regardless of external circumstances. Economic upheavals, health challenges, relationship conflicts no longer throw you into emotional chaos or mental confusion. You respond to life's inevitable challenges with wisdom and love because you're responding from spiritual identity rather than personal reaction. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or detached. It means your emotions arise from truth rather than illusion. This stability becomes a precious gift to everyone in your life. In times of crisis, you naturally become a source of calm, wisdom, and practical guidance because you're seeing clearly rather than reacting from fear or personal attachment to specific outcomes. People learn to trust your perspective because it comes from a place of spiritual discernment rather than personal opinion or emotional reaction. You become someone others can depend on for balanced, loving guidance. The ultimate fruit of Joel's teaching is what he called the mystical life, living in constant conscious communion with the divine presence that you are. Prayer becomes an ongoing recognition of truth rather than periodic asking for help, guidance, or intervention from an external God. Every moment becomes an opportunity to witness infinite love expressing itself as your experience and the experience of everyone around you. Work becomes worship, relationships become holy encounters, and the most ordinary activities become expressions of divine creativity. You realize that the mystical life isn't separate from ordinary human life. It's ordinary human life lived from your true spiritual identity. Nothing in your external circumstances needs to change except the foundation from which you perceive and respond to everything. The mystical life is available to everyone because everyone is spiritual consciousness expressing as individual human experience. Joel's teaching shows you how to recognize and live from this truth consistently. This is what Joel Goldsmith uncovered in that moment of desperate silence. Not a new religion, spiritual practice, or self-improvement technique, but the eternal truth of what you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, seeking, and spiritual effort. You are divine consciousness individualized, expressing as your unique human experience. The journey doesn't end with understanding these principles intellectually or having occasional spiritual experiences. It begins with living them moment by moment until they become more natural than breathing, more automatic than your heartbeat. This is your birthright, your true identity, your permanent spiritual foundation. You don't need to become spiritual, achieve enlightenment, or earn God's love. You need to stop believing you're anything other than the spiritual being you've always been. When this recognition becomes your natural state of consciousness, you discover that everything you ever sought through spirituality has always been your own true nature. The search ends, but life begins. Life lived from the foundation of truth, rather than the quicksand of illusion. This is Joel Goldsmith's gift to humanity, the recognition that what we seek, we are. What we hope to become, we already are. What we long for, we have never been without. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.